Vi lever i utrolige, spesielle, utfordrende, men også spennende tider. I en tid av kaos og uro søker mennesker inn til Gud. Det vil si, Gud begynner å trekke på mennesker. Våre bønner om å få se en forandring i vår nasjon, det begynner vi å se tendensene av nå. Vi hører stadig om mennesker som tar imot Jesus, som kommer til kristen tro, og derfor er nettopp det Skaperkraft har å tilby. De jobber jo med, deres visjon er jo å bygge bro mellom kirke og samfunn. Vi har en unik mulighet nå, og derfor er de ressursene som Skaperkraft gir oss så viktig for oss i denne tiden her. Nettopp derfor arrangerte de også konferansen TENK, og for deg som ikke fikk vært med på den, jeg forstår at det var venteliste der, så alle kom ikke med. Det betyr at du har mulighet til å se den her. De foregående programmene, vi er kommet til program 4. De foregående 3 ligger inne på kanal10.no under play, så der kan du se de. Du kan også da se intervjuet vi hadde med Joakim Magnus for å bli mer kjent med tankesmien Skaperkraft, deres visjon og formålet med denne konferansen. Vi skal rett inn i konferansen nå. Førstemann ut er Katy Faust. Hun har vi hatt bekjentskap med her tidligere. Hun var med i Disippel 2026 og holdt et innlegg om barns rettigheter. Det er også det organisasjonen hennes jobber for, som heter Them Before Us, altså dem før oss. Hvem er dem? Jo, barna. Hvem er oss? Det er vi. Om barns rettigheter før voksnes, som vi tror er rettigheter, men som faktisk barnas rettigheter til å ha foreldre, det er den som må være på første plass, og ikke foreldres eller voksnes rettigheter til å ha barn. Katy Faust kommer til å ta deg med mer inn i det. Vi avslutter programmet med en samtale mellom Joakim Magnus og Rod Dreher om kristen nasjonalisme, og da sett i lys av hva som skjer i USA, men hva har det å fortelle oss her hjemme? Så sett deg godt til rette, la deg opplyse, inspirere, og motiveres til å være en ambassadør ut i et samfunn hvor mennesker begynner å lengte etter Gud.
Katy, welcome to Oslo.
Thanks.
Would you just share a little bit with us? Who is Katy?
I'm a nobody. I'm a nobody. Like, I really don't have any business doing what I'm doing. I don't have any kind of a degree that, you know, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a social worker. I didn't ever plan to be at the center of the most contentious culture war issues that we're facing today. I've really just been a pastor's wife and a mom. Like, that's been the dominant theme of the last 20 years of my life. But especially when the gay marriage debate came on the scene in my state back in 2012 and then leading up to 2015 when it went national, I saw children being victimized. I saw children being forced to sacrifice their fundamental rights, their right to be known and loved by their own mother and father, to advance this backwards notion of adult equality by redefining the most child-friendly institution the world has ever known, which is marriage. And I didn't see anybody standing up on behalf of kids. You know, in the United States, we've got probably 100 or more organizations defending children's fundamental right to life, but nobody was defending their fundamental natural right on this side of the womb. So I just started writing independently and anonymously for the first couple years.
Why anonymously?
Because these people will eat you alive and they'll target your family and they'll seek to destroy you. And they did. You know, the reason why I'm not anonymous anymore is because a gay blogger who had many more followers than I did found out where my husband was pastoring and then doxed the members of my church to get me to be quiet. And it almost worked. If we choose to share our opinions, we have to develop a thick skin. But when people that you love are made to pay for what you believe, like, it totally brought me to my knees. So
why did you keep doing what you're doing?
We needed a nonprofit that formally were going to advocate on behalf of the rights of children to their mother and father, that sought to not only give them a voice when it comes to courtroom decisions or legislation, but they deserve a voice in the culture too. They need to be represented in all of these conversations that we're having about the definition of marriage and reproductive technologies and divorce and cohabitation and polygamy and anything that connects with marriage and family and children. Kids were totally sidelined. It was adults and their identities and their interests and their longings and their feelings and their backstories that dominated the conversation. And it was always the kids that lost. So that's what we work to do at Them Before Us is if I do my job in this conversation, I will represent the rights and interests and well-being of children, even if it pisses off adults.
Some people might feel like you're a little hard, like there's little love here, and especially maybe to people who are gay or lesbian, but you grew up with a mom who is lesbian. Like, how are you reflecting, your own childhood and your own relationship? Do you have any love for people who are divorced, who are gay, who are wanting family?
Yeah. My parents were married until I was 10, and I was very close to both my mom and my dad. I really considered those early years to be sweet, carefree, blessed. They divorced when I was 10. They had a good divorce. So I was still in contact with both. Split time between my dad, who dated and remarried, and my mom, who very soon after their divorce repartnered with a woman. I didn't become a Christian until I was 17. So I didn't even have another framework, another way of understanding the world or marriage or family. I just knew that I loved my mom and I loved her partner and I loved my dad. I don't consider my mother's partner to be my mother, but I do consider her to be my friend. So this mission doesn't have to do with some kind of angst or, daddy issues from growing up. It comes from the recognition that even after the divorce, I needed my mother and my father. And no child should be deprived of their mom or dad because adult identity is being exalted above their fundamental rights.
And what do you think is at risk? What's your biggest concern?
I think if you want to kind of drill down to the main threats to children, I'll put them in three different buckets. There's cultural threats, there's technological threats, and there's legal threats. So culturally, it is this idea that when it comes to marriage and family, that any two will do, or biology doesn't matter. Kids just need to be safe and loved, or they don't need moms and dads. They just need caregivers, or the kids are resilient. They'll be able to get over whatever it is that comes their way when it comes to family loss or family breakdown, or love makes a family, right? All of these cultural ideas that really just give adults a permission slip to cut a child's mother or father out of their life, partially or completely, so adults can live as they please. Culturally, that's the biggest threat. Technologically, the greatest threat to children is the manufacturing of tiny lives in laboratories. IVF, in vitro fertilization, that allows you to mass produce children. Often people are encouraged to mass produce children, to fertilize as many little lives as possible. And when you're creating babies in a petri dish, it's just as easy to use somebody else's egg or somebody else's sperm and then put it in somebody else's womb. So in essence, you can create a designer baby that very often is built on top of the destruction of many other little lives. So technologically, that's the current greatest threat to children. And then legally, the greatest threat to children is the overhaul of marriage, which used to be cross-culturally the tool that every society has used to unite a child to both people to whom they have a natural right. And now, through no-fault divorce, gay marriage, and the normalization of polygamy, has moved faster and faster towards just being a vehicle of adult fulfillment. So there's three major threats to children in three different spheres, and none of them are marginal. They are all massive when it comes to the implications for children and the destruction on their lives.
How well documented is your views? Because you said in the podcast, it's not, yes, I believe in the Bible, but it's really just common sense.
Yeah, I don't make a scriptural case for children's right to their mother and father. I don't need to. You can do that through natural law, by just discovering what we ought to do based on looking at the natural world. So this idea that children have a right to their mother and father comes from a natural law tradition, which is a case that can be made absolutely outside of special revelation. You can make the statistical case just from the mountains of data that we have on the importance of a child's married mother and father, raising them together in a low conflict home, leading to the highest likelihood that the child is going to flourish and be exempt from so many of the social ills that all of us are concerned about, like high school dropout and criminality and teen pregnancy and teen suicide. If there is a struggle that children are facing today, drill down and you can see that that demographic is overpopulated with fatherless children. Denying children their right to their mother and father in a married home is the fastest way to ensure that they're going to deal with identity struggles, physical struggles, academic challenges, emotional diagnoses. All of it comes down to, are these children being raised in the home of their own married mother and father? If you want to talk safety, that's also a major concern. So I can make the case from natural law, from statistics. I'll just make the case from common sense. It makes sense that the two people responsible for the child's existence are going to be the most connected to, invested in, and protective of them. That is a case that can be made from evolutionary biologists, right? We've seen that unrelated adults statistically always increase risk of abuse and neglect for kids. There are heroic stepmothers and stepfathers that fill the gap of a missing biological parent, but on a population-wide scale, there's no family structure that swaps out a biological parent and swaps in an unrelated adult where kids do better. In fact, the risk to children with an unrelated adult in the home are so well established that we have a name for it. It's called the Cinderella effect. Unrelated adults, a stepmother, a stepfather, a new boyfriend, a new girlfriend, do not treat children the same way as they treat their own biological kids. So I can make this case in a variety of different, I can appeal to a biblical authority if you want, but I don't need to. I can appeal to an evolutionary biologist authority. I can appeal to a natural law authority. I can appeal to a statistical authority. Which one do you want? All of them point to the fact that children need, deserve, and have a right to their married mother and father.
Most people want the kids to thrive, you know, and doing it. Why do you think this is, the agenda has been pushed?
Because if we are going to advance children's right, not just their right to life, but their right to their mother and father, we come up against what I think is the most powerful force in the social world, and that is adult self-interest. If children have a right to their mother and father, that means at some point, every adult, single, married, gay, straight, fertile, and infertile, at some point has to say, I am going to have my self-interest take a back seat, and I am going to put the child rights in front of my own desires. And most adults won't do that. Most adults will say, well, I want children to thrive, or maybe they'll say, I even think moms and dads matter, until it conflicts with something that they want. And then what you see is what I would consider, you know, something in the pro-life world. A lot of people will say, well, I'm against abortion, except in 3 cases: rape, incest, and my case. Right? Everyone wants to make an exception for themselves when the rubber meets the road, and they're the ones that may not get what they want, or they're the ones whose desires might be infringed on, or they're the one whose longing might not be fulfilled if we're going to elevate the rights of children. But that's what needs to be done, because the alternative is kids are going to sacrifice for adults. And that's what we are seeing in the cultural space, in the legal space, and the technological space. It's always kids sacrificing for adults because they can't speak for themselves. So it's very, very easy to victimize them.
And I think that will be the last word, Katy. Thank you for coming to Oslo, because our time is running up.
Good. Great to chat with you.
Og det her et veldig ømtålig tema for mange. Så jeg tenkte før vi skal høre på musikk og snakke rundt bordene, så tenkte jeg å få en liten kommentar fra 2 fine herrer. Andreas, vil du starte?
En kan ikke bare få inntrykk av det, hun sa det jo rett ut, at foreldre kan be som å masseprodusere barn gjennom sånne IVF og sånn. Av mange ting jeg kunne sagt, så vil jeg i hvert fall si det, at det er ikke inntrykket jeg har fått av de jeg har møtt. Det er en vanskelig beslutning å komme til for mange par, og når de kommer til helsevesenet, så blir de møtt på en følsom, varsom, respektabel måte, som ikke oppmuntrer til noe masseprodusering eller noe samlebånd. Det kjenner ikke jeg igjen da. Men så vil jeg også bare kommentere det at jeg tror jeg prøver å forstå ubehaget i meg ved å høre noen som er så tydelig. Og da tenkte jeg plutselig på at en gang så jeg et sånn barn leker, kjør forsiktig skilt. Og så var det noen som hadde skrevet på med tusj, voksne leker også, vi er også verdt noe. Altså at det noe med oss voksnes litt sånn krenkbarhet når noen løfter fram barna som jeg tror vi må jobbe med da. Altså, så tross ubehag og litt sånn kontroverser så jeg jo takknemlig for at noen driver en organisasjon som heter Them Before Us da.
Takk. En liten kommentar fra deg.
Ja, jeg skrev en kommentarartikkel til Vårt Land før sommeren om dette. Jeg hadde egentlig skrevet en annen, og så skrev jeg den hele natten. Og jeg fikk veldig mye, ombestemte meg i siste øyeblikk, som noen ganger, før fristen. Og fikk veldig mye respons på den. Og det jeg prøvde å sette meg inn i der, det jo argumentene for å legalisere for eksempel surrogati i Norge, sånn som FrP har gått inn for. Og det hun beskriver gjør jo at det finnes en god del argumenter for det. For det første så surrogati for eksempel, som hun beskriver, det jo ville vesten på nettet, ikke sant? Du kan selge egget ditt for dyre dommer hvis du har de rette genene, og det på en måte, det full kaos. Og det å på en måte ta kontroll over sånne ting, kan det være et godt argument for. Det samme gjelder, men ikke sant? Det jo forskjell på hvis du reiser til en eller annen sånn privatklinikk et eller annet sted i verden, og så det sånn, kanskje som hun beskriver, men i Norge det nok ikke sånn da. Men vi trenger et dypere argument, og det dette argumentet som hun løfter frem, som det argumentet som står seg. Og det at barna først. Og at det utrolig hvordan det perspektivet i den også samtalen i Norge så ikke tilstedeværende. Det veldig, veldig fascinerende egentlig, og smertefullt da, å se. Og så tenker jeg at de 100 årene før den seksuelle revolusjonen fra 1860 til 1960, de var ikke gamle dager i allmennhet. Det var også en bevegelse som var veldig ekstrem, som dette som har kommet nå, på en måte en oppgjør mot. Veldig fokus på den hvite europeiske manns overlegenhet, kvinner som i veldig stor grad i viktorianismen ble dratt inn i klærne, og liksom snerpetehet og inn, ikke sant? Som noe helt annet enn hvordan, hva skal jeg si, Kristin Lavransdatter hoppet i høye med Erlend i 1250. At det en legitim, på en måte noe vondt som det kommer ut av også. Ikke sant? Altså, folk som kjente på homofile følelser ble behandlet som psykiatriske pasienter på 1890-tallet, ikke sant? Det jo virkelig nedvergende. Og alt det der så vi må på en måte vi må forbi denne ideen om at vi skal tilbake til det som var mellom 1860 og 1960. Og vi må alliere oss med alle gode krefter som ikke vil ha det. Hvor det var masse prostitusjon, masse skjulte aborter som ingen snakket om, i 1890, ikke sant? Ekstremt som... Og vi vil ikke ha det. Vi vil ikke ha det. Så det jo på en måte ikke... Men det det som så smertefullt hvis man da ønsker å ta et sånt, jeg vil kalle det et kristenperspektiv på barn. Så blir man tatt til inntekt for. Hvordan tenkte man i Wien i 1910, eller hvordan tenkte man i London i 1885, ikke sant? Og vi vil ikke ha det heller. Og det må vi våge å kritisere, vi må call it out, og på en måte takke Gud for at det faktisk tross alt ikke sånn heller da.
En liten replikk til, og så kommer Fredrik.
Jeg bare tenkte på at sånne meninger jo veldig betente og vanskelig å ha i vår tid, kanskje fordi avstanden mellom oss så stor. Og derfor jeg så takknemlig for dette rommet, hvor vi kommer sammen. Og avstanden blir mindre, og vi ser at jo, men den meningen han hadde, den var ikke så skarp, og han var faktisk hyggelig, og vi lunsja. Og ja. Så jeg vil bare benytte anledningen til å takke for at vi har fått dette rommet til å møtes.
Så fint. Da kan vi, tusen takk for kommentarene. Welcome back, Rod.
Hey, good to be here. And can we just get one thing out of the way?
Yeah.
I think the way the American administration has treated Greenland is disgraceful. Even though Donald Trump offered to let me run a McDonald's in Nuuk, I still can't support it. So. I know everybody was thinking about that, wondering how I thought.
Good, thank you. We invited you to speak about re-enchantment of your book, but everyone thought we invited you to speak about Trump. But we didn't. But since we had this little part about politics and Christianity, we thought we'd bring you back on stage.
Oh, good.
And my first question is this. A lot of my friends, when they first heard about you, they read the Benedict option. And you present the kind of Christianity where you say, like, forget politics, it's corrupted, it's bad. We need to build society as the Benedict monks. We need to live in tight communities. We need to, practice the spiritual rhythms, hospitality. And later on, you have become more political. You have very powerful friends. And some people think, have you forgotten? Have you thought, like, no more Benedict option, let's go for political power? What do you think?
Well, I should point out that one of the great misconceptions about my book, The Benedict Option, was that I was saying, head for the hills, let's hide out. And that was never the case. I was clear in the book that we Christians must stay involved in politics at some level, if only to protect religious freedom. But there are other issues. My point in the book, though, was that nothing in politics matters if we lose the faith and if we lose Christianity. My sense has been, over the course of my career as a journalist, that the West in general is in a state sort of like the late Roman Empire. The civilization is disintegrating. And so I asked, when I started writing about the Benedict option, I asked, what would St. Benedict do? Benedict of Nursia came down to Rome in the year 500 after the Western Empire had fallen. And he all he tried to do was to figure out a way that Christians could live in ordered community in this time of chaos. And so he wrote the Rule of St. Benedict, which is just a guidebook for living in monastic community. He died in the year 547, and what he could not have foreseen is the way the monks, monasticism would spread throughout Western Europe and lay the groundwork for the rebuilding of civilization. So my idea is that what would a Benedict today do to be able to rebuild out of whatever is yet to come for our civilization? And it's true, I did say that we should de-emphasize politics, not cut them out completely, but focus more on building small communities within which we can practice the faith in a small o orthodox way, not become too corrupted by modernity, and pass the faith on to our children so the church can survive whatever is to come. Now, the book was published right after Trump was inaugurated for his first presidential term. I didn't vote for him in 2016. I didn't vote. I couldn't vote for Hillary Clinton either. There were too many moral compromises there. But what we saw in that first Trump term was the left, the woke, as we call them, became so incredibly aggressive. And not just in politics, but within the institutions that it took over, big business, universities, media, etc. And I came to realize that my opinions about politics were a bit naive. I was trying to practice some sense of, you might call it angelism, the idea of, I don't want to dirty my hands with this. I saw in the year 2018, we had a situation where a man named Brett Kavanaugh was nominated for the U.S. Supreme Court. And the left tried to destroy this man personally and professionally in a way that I thought was quite shocking. And this was when I realized that as much as I dislike him and disrespect him, Donald Trump is the only political figure standing between us and them. Because the hatred of Christians and any sort of cultural conservative was just so immense and fierce. And we could talk about particulars, but that's not. There's no need to get into that. And it's a scary time in American politics because I've never believed that Trump was a force for the good, but I think that it is perfectly legitimate when you live in a situation as radical as it has become in America and as polarized and as aggressive, it makes sense to vote for someone who will defend you. And that has, when Joe Biden won the presidency, a lot of us thought, well, things will get back to normal. But in fact, the left-wing activists were running his administration, and it got worse and worse and worse. So I'm not surprised that Christians vote for Trump. I mean, I live in Europe, but if I had lived in America, I would have voted for him too, not because I believe in him, but because I'm too afraid of the opposite, because of what they have done. But I think the real problem is placing faith in politics. The psalmist says, put not your trust in princes. And I think that the problem with American Christians of the left and of the right, but I'm of the right, so I'll speak for my side, is that we expect too much from politics. You know, I live in Hungary, and Viktor Orban is not popular in Europe, but he said something very wise about politics once. He said, people look to politicians for meaning, to give them meaning. He said, I can't give you meaning. I'm a politician. I can give you things. And by what he meant by that was that he can create through politics a space in which the institutions that are responsible for revealing meaning to society, the churches, schools, arts organizations, and so forth, politics can create a space for them to do their work. But if they don't do their work, then no gains made by politics will ever last. And I think we are in a situation, in the United States at least, where we're living out the tragic truth of that. So many Christians of the left and the right look to politics to save us. And it can't and it won't if we don't pass the faith along to our children. And you can see starting in 1991, the faith started to decline. Christian identification and participation from every denomination, Protestant, Catholic, whatever, began to decline because the previous generation of Christian leaders on the right had this idea that, the American people are fine, but the problem is the elites, and if we just get political power, we can sort everything out. Well, that was a failed strategy, and now we're living with the consequences.
Thank you. So one of my concerns, Rod, is, I don't think any of you or I believe Trump is a Christian.
No.
But he surrounds himself with quite strong believers. And I have a sense that, whatever happens in America now is so closely married with Christianity that whatever he does or says, it's like brings kind of shame on Jesus. And, so like this is Christianity, his politic is Christianity. Do you think the church in America has done something wrong by getting too political behind him?
Well, it's hard to speak in general about the church in America because there are real differences between Catholics and Protestants, say, and even among Protestants. The evangelicals have been the most vigorously pro-Trump. And there was even some sort of Trump worship in his first term, at least. And that has died down somewhat. But I think that the difficult thing is Trump is an immoral man, clearly, not a Christian, but he has been the only one, his administration, that has stepped up to protect not just Christians, but families. For example, under Joe Biden, he made executive orders forcing all public schools to admit male to female transgenders into locker rooms, into women's sports, and you didn't have a choice in it. If you didn't do it, you would be sued by the federal government, the power of the federal government. This was not nobody voted on this in Congress. It was an executive order, and Trump pushed back on that. So I think it is problematic to a certain extent that Christians, conservative Christians, have become so associated with Trump. But the left has become so radicalized and even against not just political conservatives, but cultural and religious conservatives, that what's the alternative? I hope that if once Trump goes, we get someone like Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance, who are both serious Christians, but normal, and we can sort of normalize things. The problem is America is so completely polarized now that both sides, or neither side really wants to listen to the other. And identity politics has been the acid that has destroyed liberalism in America. It's not just Trump, it's the left too. And I don't know how we put it back together.
You have, you place yourself on the right, but the last half year you become a little bit unpopular on the right too, because you wrote a piece about the right is coming for...
The woke right is coming for your
sons. And then you went public against Tucker Carlson a couple of months ago. What are you seeing that is deeply troubling you on your side of the political spectrum?
My best-selling book was called Live Not by Lies. It was published in 2020, and it was about how it started with people who came to America to escape Soviet communism. They began to sense a totalitarian element in what the left was doing, the woke left was doing. The woke left began to abandon liberal principles in favor of identity politics and cancel culture. They were boycotting businesses, causing people to lose their jobs if they didn't align very strictly with woke identity politics. And that's what the book was about. We didn't see this on the right at the time, and even on the left, we didn't see anti-Semitism. It was still just a fringe thing. Well, 5 years have passed, and now we see raging anti-Semitism on both the left and the right, among the young in particular. Now, on the right, we have seen the radicalization of the so-called Zoomer generation, those in their 20s and early 30s, especially young men, who have opened themselves up to fascism, literally fascism, racism, white nationalism, white identity politics. And they've done, I know why they've done this. They've done this because they grew up in a culture that told them that everything wrong in the world is your fault because you are a white and a male. And if you are a Christian, even worse. And so they're pushing back, but they're doing it in a very nihilistic way. I remember before I went to Washington last fall on a visit, a friend of mine who's very involved in Republican politics said that about 30 to 40% of the Zoomers involved in...
That's Gen Z.
Gen Z,
yeah.
Gen Z, involved in Washington conservative politics, either in the administration or in the think tanks and so forth, sympathize with Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is this...
Can you say who Nick Fuentes is?
Yeah, Nick Fuentes is this horrible young guy, 27 years old. He loves Hitler. He loves Stalin because Stalin was a strong man. He's an anti-Semite. He's a racist. He's just the worst of the worst, but he's very charismatic, and he's got a following among young people, young men especially. And I found this so shocking, 30 to 40%. But when I got to DC, I started talking to people of that age group. I would meet and say, is this true, 30 to 40%? And they all said, yeah. And I asked this one very smart Gen Z guy I know, I said, what do these people want? Want anything. They want to tear it all down. Now, I knew from when I was studying totalitarianism for my last book, Hannah Arendt, the great 20th century political philosopher, she wrote a book called The Origins of Totalitarianism in 1951, in which she tried to understand why Russia and Germany had fallen to two very different forms of totalitarianism. She identified several characteristics of those societies, the most important being mass atomization and loneliness. And another one is people cease to care about the truth and they only care about having their narratives reinforced. They choose transgressiveness for its own sake. So when Nick Fuentes says Hitler is effing cool, oh, they love that, you know, not because they necessarily agree that Hitler is cool, but they like anything that makes the old people mad. And they also, Arendt said, a complete lack of trust in institutions. plus the rise of anti-Semitism. Well, all of that is everywhere in America now. It was strongly on the left when I wrote the first book, and now it's on the right. So my next book is going to be about the parallels between Germany in the 1920s, the Weimar Republic, and contemporary America.
So, yeah.
I mean,
it's a heavy stuff, and we had breakfast this morning, and your prediction, or you hope this is not going to happen, but you're not so very hopeful for either America or Western Europe.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody here to follow on YouTube a professor at King's College London in the War Studies Department. His name is David Betz, last name spelled B-E-T-Z. David Betz is an academic expert in Civil War. And he's been saying for a couple of years now, and has gotten louder about it over the last year, that we in the West, Western Europe and America, are headed towards civil war. And he makes a very careful argument from the academic data of what we know about how civil wars start, that things are much less stable than we like to think. Now, he's not talking about armies versus armies. He says if it happens, it will be more like Lebanon in the 1980s or Northern Ireland during the Protestant Catholic fights. And what's so scary about it is how careful he is. And he just marshals the logic and the data. I've lived in Europe for the last 4 years. I can see Britain and France are getting really close to this, mostly because of migration, but there are other things too. But I found it hard to imagine in my own country. Well, now with the recent ICE raids and the polarization coming from that, I can see it happening. And he says it will involve things like assassinations, bombings, things like that, which none of us want to see. But the logic of polarization and the demonization of the other seems very hard to stop. Right now, just this morning, I looked at the news, and there was an attack on a federal U.S. government facility by a mob in Los Angeles. And the police weren't able to stop it, at least the last time I checked. I mean, this is the sort of thing that we talk about when we talk about civil war. We've had in the past week on social media nurses from hospitals putting their faces out there saying that if any agent from ICE, the immigration enforcement, or even somebody who is a Trump supporter comes to the hospital, they will refuse to treat them. And one nurse even suggested poisoning them. I mean, she lost her job. But it's just insane, not only that they would think that, but that they would put their faces and their names to it. But that's how polarized things are in America. And one thing that concerns me living in Europe is I know that the American media do a terrible job of explaining Europe to American readers and viewers. And I wonder, and I'm quite sure it must be the same way for you all, that you don't get a full picture of the details of what's happening in the United States. So, and then we're often driven to our favorite media trusted authorities, but can you really trust them? Who can you trust? That's part of the problem.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are feeling, anxious about the future. Do you see any positivity, any hopeful? How can you become nuanced again? Because I think that's some of the problem. Yeah. We're so emotionally charged. Like you're either, a fascist or you're this. There's no nuance. There's not a lot of wanting to meet and actually talk or argue for heaven's sake, as the old rabbis would say. Yeah. What's actually the truth? Well, what's the way forward for Christianity?
Well, we have to remember something that Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that I think it's one of the most important things anybody said in the 20th century. He said he learned when he was in the Soviet Gulag that the line between good and evil does not pass between social classes, or you might say races or political parties, but right down the middle of every human heart. There's real humility in that, Christian humility. We have to accept that we are sinners and that we might be wrong about something. As America de-Christianizes and secularizes, we are seeing rushing into the vacuum left by the loss of Christianity, a sort of political radicalism, just as happened in Germany and Russia, but also a neo-paganism. And we Christians have to stand firm against that and offer a positive alternative. We're seeing, I remember I'm Eastern Orthodox, as you all will know, and during COVID, we saw in our little parish in South Louisiana, where Orthodoxy is very weird, we saw young people coming to our church because they were scared by COVID. COVID revealed to them how fast everything could fall apart. And I talked to this one young evangelical couple, and I said, welcome to our church, but what brings you here? They said that COVID had frightened them so much that they realized the megachurch Christianity, the happy clappy, self-improvement, be nice Christianity was not going to be enough to help them survive as Christians through the collapse of civilization if it came to that. And I think there's something really true about that. Now, I'm not saying everybody should convert to Orthodoxy or whatever, but I am saying that Christians need to bear witness through whatever is coming to the hope that Jesus Christ gives us. As I said last night in the talk, hope for a Christian is not the same thing as optimism. I'm not optimistic about the near future or even the long-term future for the West, but I am hopeful because I'm a Christian. And the hope consists in knowing that even if we have to suffer, even to the point of martyrdom, I hope it doesn't come to that, but even if it did, as long as we unite our suffering to Christ, it has ultimate meaning. And I think one of the things that we need to do now is, as Christians, is to read the stories of the Christians under communism and under Nazism who bore witness to the truth, even with their lives, because it may come to that with us. And even if it doesn't come to giving your life, the fact that people need to be able to see, ordinary people, that there are sane, loving, compassionate people, but also people of principle who aren't afraid to take a stand for the truth, even if it makes them unpopular. One thing to be practical about it, I learned something really important from a man named Václav Benda. He died in 1999, but he and his wife Camilla were the only Christians in the inner circle of the Czech anti-communist resistance. And Václav Benda knew, he was Catholic, he knew that there was no way to practice ordinary politics under totalitarianism, but he also felt that he still had a responsibility to do something. Well, politics most basically is working out how we live together in peace and flourish. What he did was invite his neighbors out for a picnic in the park, just to get them out of their houses so they could see each other face to face and realize that we're all human, we're all part of the community, because he knew that the communists kept themselves in power in part by making everyone feel isolated. So I think one very practical thing we can do as Christians or as citizens is get off of our smartphones, get off of the laptop, get out of our house and meet each other and just talk. We don't even have to talk about politics, but just talk and realize that your neighbor is a human being. It's a suffering human being just like you.
Thank you. I struggled sleeping last night because I was full of thoughts after yesterday and today, and I was thinking about Christianity, nationalism, all these things. And I remember from my master's degree that the book that maybe spoke and touched me most was from the Rwanda war there. From I think it's called Kong. I don't remember his last name, the one who wrote it. But he said it was sad to read his story from Rwanda and say the church was part of it. And the horror story. And he said something, a quote like, the blood ran thicker than the baptism.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It was more important with your ethnicity and belonging to your group than your Christian faith.
Yeah.
Do you see that? And he said what was missing in Rwanda was the prophetic posture. He said we're pastoral. Even the priests would give communion after they would literally slaughter down people. So they had a lot of care, but they didn't dare to speak truth and to put, the church to speak truth in this horrible, horrible situation.
Because it requires courage. And it not only requires courage, it requires being able to stand back from the immediacy of your situation and get some sort of historical perspective. I remember one thing that really shocked me. I'm from a small town in South Louisiana, town of 2,000 people, a village on the Mississippi River. I moved back to this village in the year 2011 after my sister died. And when I was there, I learned from a friend that in 1964, 3 years before I was born, there had been a riot on the courthouse lawn, a white riot, because an angry white mob rioted when a black pastor registered to vote. You know, this was the age of the Civil Rights Movement, the Ku Klux Klan. And it was so shocking to me to read this because I grew up in the town after these battles. Nobody ever talked about it. And I thought, how could this have happened in my peaceful little town? But of course it did. And I was feeling very judgmental about my parents' generation. That was their generation. But then I realized my parents' generation grew up in a time before mass media. I mean, yes, they had newspapers, but the newspapers would never talk about race. They didn't have TV. And the only place I ever heard anything about racism being bad growing up as a child in the 70s was on TV. The pastors certainly in the village would never speak about white supremacy. So the reason I bring this story up is because I had to realize if I had been a young man in that town back then, I might have been in that mob too. In the same way I probably would have been in the mob in Jerusalem saying, crucify him, crucify him. None of this, of course, is to justify this, but it is to say that it's so easy to go with the crowd, whether the crowd is a left-wing crowd or a right-wing crowd, and to dehumanize the people around us. The hardest thing to do is to be courageous, especially when it could cost you your life. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, in his speech at Davos last week, he brought up the famous story that Václav Havel told about the greengrocer. Havel, who was a Czech dissident who became the first president of free Czechoslovakia, he told a parable. He said, imagine you're a greengrocer under communism, and all the businesses in town have a sign in the window that says, "Workers of the world unite." Nobody believes it, but everyone has the sign there because they're afraid not to conform. One day, the greengrocer takes the sign down saying, "I will not live in this lie." What happens to him? Well, he's arrested by the secret police. They take his business away. He has to suffer. Maybe his job after that is to become a street sweeper or a garbage man. His children are denied opportunities, and so forth. So he's been defeated in one way. But, says Havel, he's won a great moral victory. And if other people who also know they're living in a system of lies, if they see that it is possible to stand up to the lies, if you are willing to accept suffering, then more and more people may do that, and the system built on lies may fall. Well, Havel was not a Christian, but this is a call to us, Christians, whatever the lies are, whether they come from the left or the right, to take a stand, even if it costs you something, because you are ultimately accountable to God. But not only that, you can be a leader in your own community in ways you may not even be aware of, not even in this life. When St. Benedict did what he did, when he died in 547, he had founded 13 monasteries around Rome, which would have been an impressive life if that's all he had done. But over the next several hundred years, the monastic movement exploded in Europe, and there were thousands of monasteries founded that helped slowly Christianize Western Europe. So the one act of sacrifice and courage that we do for the sake of the Lord can have consequences that are beyond our control for the good. And that's all we have. That's all we can be asked to do.
Thank you, Rod. It'd be great to talk more to you, but we have more stuff going on. Give him a hand. Thank you.